What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there. Today we're talking about the quarterbacks we're going to start and sit for Week 14 fantasy football, aka Bye-Mageddon. That's right. Don't forget, 6 teams on bye this week. We will not have at our fantasy disposal Marcus Mariota, Justin Fields, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan, Andy Dalton, Taylor Gimme a Heineke. None of these guys are going to be available for us here this week. So who are we going to start? Now there's a lot of good options this week. A lot of stud guys with some decent options to hopefully carry us through here throughout the end of the season. Maybe you're in a 2 quarterback league. There's another few options out there for you as well, so make sure you stay tuned. Now before we get into all of these matchups, just a quick reminder. There is a free square play on Prize Picks this week. If you sign up for a new Prize Picks account, use the referral code Headliners, make an initial $10 deposit. Heck, we'll match your deposit all the way up to $100. There is a free square. Justin Herbert, passing prop right now, is set at a half a yard. So as long as he throws for 1 yard this week, which I think he probably will, that is a free square win. You only need to match one other there to walk away with some money, and we may have one in this video, so make sure you pay attention to all these matchups. But here we go, Thursday Night Football. Let's kick it off with the Las Vegas Raiders and Los Angeles Rams. And right off the bat, we'll talk about Derek Carr of the Las Vegas Raiders, currently sitting at quarterback 13 overall on the year, thanks in a large part to Davante Adams and his consistency in catching touchdown passes, because now Derek Carr is averaging over 250 yards passing and 2 touchdowns over his last 5 games played. Now for his career, he hasn't had over 27 touchdowns since 2016. That was the year in which he finished 3rd in MVP voting. He's already up to 20 this year and still has 5 games to play. It's looking pretty good. Now, we know Las Vegas is going to throw the ball a lot. Even though we're seeing a ton of Josh Jacobs, we're still seeing a Rams offense that's throwing the ball almost 36 times per game. Now they're going up against the Rams. They allow only 16.3 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but have now given up over 300 yards passing in back-to-back ball games. The running game pretty banged up here for Las Vegas. We know Josh Jacobs has a calf strain. We also know that Brandon Bolden banged up, Amir Abdullah is banged up, but all that would really mean is if they can't get a full set of touches, we see more in the passing game here, and that benefits Derek Carr. He's currently top 10 in the NFL among all quarterbacks in passing yards, touchdowns, air yards. People still hate this guy, but I personally have no issue starting him on Thursday night. For his opponent, I don't care who it is, it's any Rams quarterback. At least they just signed Baker Mayfield, right? Probably doesn't really matter though, because I don't care if it's Matthew Stafford, I don't care if it's Wolford, Perkins, Mayfield. I don't care if they bring back motherfucking Joe Montana to come quarterback this team. I am not interested. All their main weapons are injured. It's a revolving door at the quarterback position. Everybody else is just hurt, even though it's a good matchup. I'm not interested here. Going to pass on any Rams quarterback Thursday night. Let's move on to Sunday football now. Got the New York Jets and the Buffalo Bills. We'll start off with Mike White. Now, let me start off by saying this. I like Mike White and what he brings to this offense for the Jets. I still just think that the hype is getting a little bit too high. Last week he had 369 yards passing, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Kind of helped save the day by getting a rushing touchdown, but had to throw the ball 57 times. But we have seen this before from Mike White, and you don't have to think back very far. It was just last year. Mike White takes over the role there in New York, comes off to a hot start, starts putting up some big numbers there in one of his starts, and then he meets the Buffalo Bills. And in that matchup, he went for 251 yards passing, no touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and we didn't see Mike White again until now this season. Now, granted, this team in New York, they're a lot better this year than they were last year. I'm not taking that away from them. But do I really want to tempt fate and start a quarterback that's shown at times that he's not able to stay consistent on the road in Buffalo when they only allow 14.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, the 7th fewest in the NFL? This is an offensive line that's still held together by like that paper mache crap that you used in 2nd grade. It's not hard to bust through, and with a matchup against the Bills, that is not ideal. I love the potential for this kid. I love the story of Mike White. I want to see him succeed, but I'm not going to risk my fantasy playoff berth by starting Mike White in a road game in Buffalo in Week 14. His opponent, Josh Allen. And it really seems like He's starting to get healthier and healthier here as the weeks go on. He's now had back-to-back games with at least 2 passing touchdowns. That's not something he did in the 3 games prior, but let us not forget that it was in the matchup between these two that he originally got injured back in week 9, which was his worst passing game of the season. 205 yards passing, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, really saved his fantasy day by running 9 times for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Jets defense is legit. They're only allowing 14.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And this is just one of those games where they both get each other's best shot. It's a division rivalry, and the Jets don't suck anymore. This is going to be a good ball game, and we know that Buffalo wants redemption after losing to this same Jets team back in week 9. The injuries on the offensive line for the Buffalo Bills really limiting the deep shots down the field because they can't keep the pocket from collapsing fast enough to let routes develop down the field. That's a little bit of an issue there for the Buffalo Bills. There may be some struggles at times this week against this defense. Maybe he's not running a whole lot. Maybe he's not finding much success down the field. But this is Josh Allen, and he can put up points in a hurry, and I don't care who he's playing. You still start one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football every single week. Which will take us down to the Cleveland Browns and Cincinnati Bengals. Speaking of one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy, all right, it's not Deshaun Watson. It's kind of why I had my worries, right? I'm not an I told you so type of guy. Because honestly, he may have actually performed worse than I thought he was going to perform, and I really wasn't expecting that much. He went 12 of 22 for 131 yards, no touchdowns and interception, had 7 carries for 21 on the ground. Only 22 pass attempts, multiple bad decisions. Accuracy was all over the place. The timing with his wide receivers were off, which is all expected. This is exactly why I didn't want to start Deshaun Watson last week, and really the main reason I will not start Deshaun Watson any week until I really see him get comfortable in this offense. An offense that's going to look different than what it did the first 12 weeks of the season. This is what happens when you don't play football for 2 years. You cannot simulate game speed. No matter how much you practice, no matter how much you work out, when you get on the field and the whistle blows, it's a different ball game. And we saw those struggles from Deshaun Watson just last week. And honestly, this matchup is going to be way harder than it was last week. Going up against Cincinnati, they allow only 13.9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and they just held Patrick Mahomes to 223 yards and only 1 touchdown. They're pretty good. Now, David Njoku, still questionable. Wide receivers, Anthony Schwartz, David Bell, questionable to play, and we already know they're still missing multiple pieces of their offensive line. Does this guy have the talent to return? For sure. But it's going to take time, and I'm not going to rush him into my lineup until I see it return, because the potential outlook could be exactly what we saw last week. A quarterback whose timing is off, who struggles, and really would kill your fantasy chances if he's in your lineup. So for now, he's a sit. His opponent, Joe Burrow. Joe Burr. Currently quarterback 4 overall on the season. He's throwing touchdowns. He's running touchdowns. Do you realize he has just as many rushing touchdowns as Josh Allen does this year? A lot of people don't really look at Joe Burrow and account for his rushing upside. But he's also second in the NFL in passing touchdowns and only trails Patrick Mahomes. The guy is scoring points. This guy likes himself some TDs, right? That's exactly what Joe Burrow likes. He's averaging the 7th most pass attempts per game of any quarterback in the league. Now he's going against Cleveland. They allow only 15.5 fantasy points per game, but they haven't allowed a 300-yard passer since week 6. Not to mention, this Browns team just beat Joe Burrow back in week 8. In that ball game, Burrow had 232 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception, but he didn't have Jamar Chase in that ball game, and that changes things just a little bit. Hayden Hurst, questionable to play. Joe Mixon, still questionable to play. But this team hasn't lost a game since they lost to the Browns a few weeks ago. They're starting to play really well, and Jamar Chase is back on the field, and that only ups the ceiling every single week of Joe Burrow, and he'll remain a start. How about the Houston Texans and Dallas Cowboys? Now we're going back to Davis Mills. I mean, that's really not a shock to anyone, right? I mean, because Kyle Allen wasn't going to be any better. Everyone in the world seemed to know that, except for the Houston Texans, apparently. Not that Davis Mills was out there playing great, but he does at least have 4 games this year with 2 passing touchdowns. Kyle Allen had 2 touchdowns and 5 turnovers in just the 2 games that he played. Now, yeah, I would probably go back to Davis Mills as well, but not a good matchup going up against the Dallas Cowboys, who allow the 4th fewest points to opposing quarterbacks at 13.4 per game. You got Brandon Cooks questionable to play. Multiple pieces of this offensive line still missing, just not enough to really work with here, especially not in the way that Dallas is playing right now on defense. He's going to be a sit. His opponent, Dak Prescott, the passing touchdowns are a-flowing right now in Dallas. 2+ passing touchdowns now in 5 straight games, and the Cowboys themselves have scored over 40 points in 3 of their last 5 games played. But what's really crazy is, unlike in years past, we're not seeing Dak Prescott go out there and throw the ball over 40 times a game. The volume isn't huge. He's become a lot more efficient and scoring more touchdowns. He's averaging only 31.2 pass attempts per game. That's 24th in the league. The passing yardage may be down, but the touchdowns remain, so you really don't see the main difference in fantasy points. But now they're going up against Houston, who only allows 12.7 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's 2nd lowest in the league. They've only allowed over 200 yards passing 1 time in the last month of the season. However, in those games, they faced Deshaun Watson last week, Taylor Heineke, Daniel Jones, not guys really known for huge passing style offenses, so that definitely helps that number. Plus, there's a chance that they could get back offensive tackle Tyron Smith. Nothing like having a great team and then getting back an all-pro offensive lineman for the playoff stretch. Absolutely love that for the play of Dak Prescott. Now, even though on paper this looks like a pretty tough matchup, the Texans once again will be without more than likely defensive back Derek Stingley, and this Cowboys offense has so many weapons you can't stop all of them. We're going to continue to start Dak Prescott. What about the Minnesota Vikings and Detroit Lions? We'll start it off with Captain Kirk Cousins, who's now down to quarterback 14 overall on the season. He's really cooled off here as of late. Only 1 game over the last month with multiple touchdowns. But look at the teams he's faced here as of late. The Buffalo Bills, the Dallas Cowboys, New England Patriots, New York Jets. That is a damn tough stretch of ball games right there for quarterbacks, and that's probably the reason we're seeing the lower point totals here as of late. He's still throwing the ball a lot, over 38 times a game, 5th most in the league. Detroit allows the most points of any team in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks at 23.9, and have been way easier to throw on than they have been to run on as of late. They faced each other back in week 3. In that ball game, Kirk Cousins, 260 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. What this team needs more than anything, though, is the return of offensive lineman Christian Darrisaw. He is the key to this offensive line and could really help give Kirk a little bit more time back in the pocket. This offense, though, if I'm being completely honest, is starting to struggle due to the Cooper Kupp syndrome, if that makes any sense. They're really just focused on Justin Jefferson and nothing else. They're becoming super one-dimensional in that way. They need to start involving the likes of Adam Thielen, TJ Hawkinson, even Dalvin Cook a little bit more. Someone else in this offense other than just Justin Jefferson each and every week, because if they don't, once they get to the playoffs, it's going to be a very short run for them. They need someone else in this offense to step up. In a good matchup, I'm going to start Kirk Cousins. Also going to start Jared Goff as well. Right now sitting at quarterback 17 overall, really starting to return to his early season form as well. Back-to-back games now with at least 240 yards passing and at least 2 touchdowns. But it's because of the volume the last couple weeks. Over the last 2 weeks, he's averaging 39 pass attempts per game. In the 3 games prior to these last 2, he didn't crack over 26 attempts per game. It's pretty simple. More attempts equal more yards. Now they're going up against Minnesota. They allow the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks at 19.9. And back in week 3 against the Minnesota Vikings, he had 277 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Another team whose offensive line still banged up. Evan Brown still questionable there. Would love to have him back here this week, but we're starting to see this offense get more and more vertical And we really haven't even incorporated Jameson Williams here as of yet. DJ Chark looking good. Amon-Ra St. Brown looking good. DeAndre Swift starting to turn things back on again. I'm riding the hot wave, and I'm starting Jared Goff. How about the Philadelphia Eagles and New York Giants? We'll start off with Jalen Hurts. Do you think you should start Jalen Hurts this week? If you had any other thought other than, oh, hell yeah, I'm a little bit worried for your decision-making here in fantasy football. He's currently one of only 3 quarterbacks in fantasy football that has scored over 300 points this year, the others being Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. He's coming off arguably his best game of the year passing, 380 yards passing with 3 touchdowns and added a rushing touchdown against Tennessee just last week. Also had the most pass attempts we've seen him have in a game all season with 39. Now a matchup going up against the Giants. They allow right around 15.3 fantasy points per game, 9th fewest in the league. But this is the Eagles offense, and they don't care about your cute analytics. They don't care about your cute stats. They just want to go out there and score points. Overall, a very healthy team. And oh yeah, he's done all of this as of late and has had less than 30 yards rushing in 5 of his last 7 games. This dude never sits in fantasy football. As for his opponent, Daniel Jones, he sits most times in fantasy football. But honestly, somehow, this is another one of those cases how I don't get how Daniel Jones is still a verge top 10 overall on the season at the quarterback position in fantasy football. It's because he gets a few huge games time and again, surrounded by a bunch of absolute nothingness, and when you average them all out, overall, he doesn't look half bad on paper, but you know he's not throwing the ball a whole lot because he has no one to throw it to because everyone is hurt, averaging under 30 pass attempts per game. No team allows fewer points to opposing quarterbacks than the Philadelphia Eagles at only 11.7 per contest. Basically, everyone on this team, aside from Saquon Barkley and Darius Slayton, are on the injury report right now. The rushing upside will always be there for Daniel Jones, but there's also going to be games where he gets you 3 carries for 14 yards like we saw just a couple weeks ago. I need a lot more consistency or a better matchup if I'm going to start Daniel Jones. Have neither right now. He's going to be a sit. How about the Baltimore Ravens and Pittsburgh Steelers? Now, no Lamar Jackson. More than likely, we got Tyler Huntley with Lamar Jackson dealing with an injury. What's the offense going to look like in Baltimore? Well, we know Tyler Huntley still likes to run. More of a dink and dunk down the field type guy, though honestly not going to be somebody who goes vertical down the field very often. But I'm going to be completely honest here. In 2 quarterback leagues, I wouldn't mind this guy as my quarterback 2 this week, but there is a lot of risk involved. Now, between the 30-plus pass attempts and the 5 to 10 rush attempts per game that we're probably going to see from him, he's going to get more than enough volume to score points, but is he going to get touchdowns? That's the biggest issue here because Lamar Jackson in this offense was struggling to score touchdowns. I can't imagine that Tyler Huntley is the key to unlocking all the touchdowns. Now, I feel like I've said touchdowns 45 times here with just Tyler Huntley. There's just not a whole lot of them to go around in Baltimore. Now they're going up against Pittsburgh. They allow the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks at 19.1 per game. Offensive lineman, arguably their best offensive lineman, Ronnie Stanley, still questionable. We already know about Lamar Jackson. But ironically enough, the last time that Tyler Huntley started a ball game was week 17 of 2021. His opponent in that game, the Pittsburgh Steelers, in that ball game, had 141 yards passing, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 12 carries for 72 yards on the ground. And honestly, I could see him having a similar stat line to that this week. A huge ball game? Not so much. A solid floor game as a quarterback 2 in 2 quarterback leagues and Superflex leagues? Potentially, but overall, in 12-team leagues, in 1 quarterback leagues, not going to touch Tyler Huntley. His opponent, Kenny Pickett. I mean, the natural progression of a quarterback is happening right here for Kenny Pickett. He started off with a bunch of turnovers and very little production. Then he gets more comfortable in the offense and the NFL game, and the turnovers start to come down, but the production is still low because he's really trying to minimize mistakes. The next step to come along in this progression is going to be added production. But when is that going to happen? He's only exceeded 30 pass attempts 1 time over the last month, hasn't broken over 200 yards passing, but 1 time over the last month either. Baltimore's allowing right around 17.7 fantasy points per game, but over the last 4 games, they haven't allowed over 200 yards passing but one time. They're really playing better here as of late over the last month. No major injuries of concern for the Pittsburgh Steelers, just not enough production here in a difficult matchup for me to want to trust Kenny Pickett. But honestly, he's moving in the right direction. At some point, I expect the touchdowns to come. How about the Jacksonville Jaguars, Tennessee Titans? And we'll start it off with Trevor Lawrence and the scare that we had in week 13. That looked like a horrific injury when it happened. The human leg is not supposed to bend that way. I was scared. I looked over the dock and I'm like, man, did we just lose Trevor Lawrence? And then the kid pops up, jogs off the field. They go to halftime. He comes back out and acts like nothing happened. I mean, how he escaped injury is beyond me. It was still an overall down week for him in general against Detroit. Only scored 16 fantasy points, but still throwing the ball 35 times a game, which is 13th most in the league. Tennessee, way easier to throw on than they are to run on. They're allowing over 21 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and they were just torched by Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles. Overall, fairly healthy team here in Jacksonville. I do expect Trevor Lawrence to be on the injury report majority of this week just to make sure he's good to go for this week. I don't really see anything out there that says he's in jeopardy of not playing. So looks like we're good to go for Trevor Lawrence. It's a team that can really beat opposing defenses deep down the field. They have weapons that can do that with Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones, Zay Jones as well. And when they're looking to bounce back and right the ship here, a good opportunity for Trevor Lawrence to do it against the Tennessee Titans here this week. Don't forget, he's still a top 10 fantasy quarterback, sitting at quarterback 9 overall on the season. His opponent, Ryan Tannehill, another downer of a week for Tanny out there. Now has 1 touchdown over his last 2 weeks, but he did go up against the Cincinnati Bengals and Philadelphia Eagles. Tough matchups there for sure. This is going to be a much better matchup for him. The volume just isn't consistent. He's either somewhere between 34 and 36 attempts per game or all the way down at like 20 to 22. There isn't really some median average right in there that we can basically count on each and every week. Going up against the Jags, they allowed just under 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 8th most in the league. But Treylon Burks, wide receiver Treylon Burks, questionable in concussion protocol. Does he return for this ball game? Ryan Tannehill, if he wants to have any shot at a solid fantasy day, needs a healthy Treylon Burks on the field. As of right now, we really don't know if he's going to be out there or not. He's one of the best options in this offense for Ryan Tannehill. A little bit too risky, a little bit too inconsistent. He's going to be a sit. How about the Kansas City Chiefs and Denver Broncos? Started off with Patrick Mahomes, and luckily, Patrick Mahomes doesn't have to face Joe Burrow this week, so he has a chance to win, I guess. But we know we're going to start him in fantasy football regardless as long as he is healthy. Denver, they only allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 12.7 per game. But it's helped that over the last few weeks, they've faced the likes of Zach Wilson, Ryan Tannehill, Sam Darnold, Tyler Huntley. They've really benefited from that. Offensive guard Joe Thuney, Kadarius Toney, they're still questionable to play. Sounds like Toney could be back at practice here today, so we'll have to wait and see how he looks out there. But let's not forget that Denver overall, as a franchise, as a team right now, is struggling, and Patrick Mahomes wants to right the ship in Kansas City and really get this team back on track after losing last week. We're not ever sitting Patrick Mahomes. We will sit Russell Wilson every damn week of the season. But just think about this. It is December right now. What is it? December 7th, week 14 of the season, and Russell Wilson has a total of 9 touchdowns on the year. He hasn't had less than 27 touchdowns in the season since 2016. Dude's sitting at 9 overall right now. Let's also not forget, though, that he's probably playing for one of the worst coaching staffs I've ever seen. The play calling is horrendous. Overall, it's bad in Denver for sure. Kansas City, they allow the 6th most points to opposing quarterbacks, over 20 per game. Still not interested. Cortland Sutton, doubtful to play. Hamler out. We got Chase Edmonds out. The offensive line, just an absolute mess. Do you think that this guy has forgotten how to play football? No. Do you think that he can be good again? Yeah, I think that he does. This dude has just zero confidence right now. He doesn't have his team behind him. The fan base is against him. Things are just not good right now for the Denver Broncos. It's pretty bad. Now, we're going to go on to the Carolina Panthers and Seattle Seahawks, and you would think that, Jake transitioned this perfectly because he just talked about how bad it is, and now we're talking about Sam Darnold. And honestly, It's a pretty good transition when we're talking about Sam Darnold, but he wasn't horrible 2 weeks ago prior to their bye week. Had 164 yards passing, a touchdown, also added a rushing touchdown. But this isn't some juggernaut-style offense that can go out there and really just put up points on everyone. Plus, this is a matchup that I kind of expect them to run a little bit more as long as D'Onta Foreman is good and healthy to go. Seattle, they allow the 13th most fantasy points to quarterbacks at 17.5 per game, and overall this team is fairly healthy. I just don't want to look down at my roster in week 14 of fantasy football and see Sam Darnold as my starting quarterback, because I already know I'm probably going to be playing from behind at some point here, because Sam Darnold just ain't it here for fantasy football this week. His opponent, Geno Smith, quarterback 7 overall on the season, and yet another multi-touchdown game last week against the Rams, has back-to-back games now with over 325 yards passing and at least 2 touchdowns. Doesn't have to throw the ball a whole lot either. The guy is super efficient, like through the roof. This guy is completing 73% of his passes. Absolutely insane. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett playing great football. Nobody can guard these guys as of right now. The Carolina Panthers, they allow just over 16 fantasy points per game, which is great. And I'm actually going to head over to Prize Picks right now, though, and smash the over on the passing yard prop of Geno Smith, which is currently sit at 245.5. That's a number that he's beaten now in 4 straight ball games. And with the running game banged up like it is right now in Seattle, I think they throw the ball a lot more, and I'm going to take the over right there. But when we talk about that running game, you got, Travis Homer potentially going to play, but he's banged up and was sick last week. DJ Dallas, hurt. Kenneth Walker, hurt. This is just a backfield that is hurting right now, and they may have to rely a little bit more on that passing game, which is fine because Geno has shown that he can go out there and win ball games that way too. It doesn't matter if it's at home, if it's on the road. Geno Smith is just going to go out there and throw tutties on everyone all year long, and honestly, the confidence that I'm seeing in like a DK Metcalf makes this team pretty freaking scary every single week, because we already know that guy is a freak that borderline can't be stopped by almost anyone in the league. I'm going to start Geno Smith. How about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, San Francisco 49ers? And we'll talk about Tom Brady first here, because it may not have been pretty, but that's what Tom Brady will do for you. What we just saw last week, it's just what he does, right? Now 3 straight games with multiple touchdowns, hasn't had less than 250 yards passing now in 6 straight ball games. Now, with no running lanes to run through, you know they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. Over 40 pass attempts in 9 out of his last 10 games played. But this is not an easy matchup whatsoever. Going up against San Francisco, they allow only 13.8 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is 5th fewest in the league. Right now, the offensive line looking more like a wet paper towel than a well-oiled machine. That's for sure, especially without Tristan Wirfs out there. Counting out Tom Brady, though, doesn't really work very often. Is he going to be a smash start for me this week? No, there are some serious concerns, and there is a whole lot of risk right here. But the reason I have him in the start column is I expect a lot of checkdowns to the likes of Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White. I'm hoping one of those guys can take it the distance and find the end zone. You never know, we may get ourselves another solid floor game from Tom Brady. His opponent, Brock Purdy. Now, I took some time on Brock Purdy because, he's basically the face of the NFL now, right? Kind of got some Bailey Zappi type vibes going on right now from Brock Purdy. The kid came in and he played well last week. 210 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, an interception. But is he really that good? Is Mr. Irrelevant actually relevant? Because he's got a real shot to go out there and put up numbers every single week. But when you have the likes of a Brandon Ayuk, a Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and many others in this offense, it's really easy for one of those guys to break a big play and have it really boost up the potential production of Brock Purdy. I want to believe that this kid's going to have a good game. I really want that to be the case. But there's really nothing to go out there and say, hey, I feel safe in saying that you should start him as well. Going up against Tampa Bay, they allow only 15.9 fantasy points per game. Nick Bosa is questionable, and so is offensive tackle Spencer Burford. He's questionable as well. But anytime you have a team, like I say, with the weapons that I just listed, a quarterback can definitely pop off in fantasy football. What we're looking for is that safety, that consistency, and we just haven't seen it yet here from Purdy. It's going to be a tall task for him to go out there and put up big numbers in this ball game. I want to gamble, but in week 14 with playoffs on the line for so many people, this is probably not the time or the place to do it. How about we go to the Miami Dolphins and Los Angeles Chargers now, this Sunday night football game, and my Manscaped matchup of the week. Don't forget, as soon as this video is over, head over to manscaped.com. Christmas is right around the corner. It's not just ball trimmers. They got nose hair trimmers, they got lip balm, they got deodorant, they got shower gel. Whatever it is that you may need, find something for yourself, a significant other, and get it ordered, wrapped up, put it under the Christmas tree. But make sure you use referral code HEADLINERS at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. But here we have the matchup of Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Herbert, because right now I'm feeling very fancy. Now, Tua is basically coming off one of his toughest matchups of the season and still finished with 295 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a costly fumble at the end of the ballgame. Not great to have 3 turnovers in a game, but 17 fantasy points against the San Francisco 49ers is well above average. But this is what you can come to expect when you have the likes of Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Heck, lately, Trent Sherfield is a guy out there racking up a bunch of yak yards, and we've talked about that forever. When you have wide receivers that are capable of yak, it really helps the floor each and every week of their quarterback, and that's what's really helping Tua right now. Going up against the Chargers, great matchup. They allow over 17.7 fantasy points per game, 11th most in the league, but I can't sugarcoat this. Injuries are piling up in Miami. Offensive guard Austin Jackson now on IR. Terran Armstead, offensive tackle, questionable to play. Jalen Waddle not 100% healthy, and even Tua himself is dealing with a minor ankle injury. I got to slow my roll here a little bit with this offense. The offensive line injuries are going to lead to struggles in the running game, which means they're going to have to develop more hot reads, more quick slants, more short throws down the field, really get the ball in the hands of their playmakers to let something happen, because he's not going to have a whole lot of time in the pocket is Tua. We really need Jalen Waddle to be healthy here. If he's not, kind of look for the likes of a Trent Sherfield, maybe even a Mike Gesicki to step up here this week if Waddle is limited, but we're still starting Tua for Justin Herbert. What I love about some of these quarterbacks is even when they struggle a little bit throwing the ball into the end zone, maybe they're limited on touchdowns from time to time, that they throw so much that their yardage is so high that it kind of makes up for it here just a little bit, similar to what happened last week with Justin Herbert. Only threw for 1 touchdown, but threw for 335 yards and no interceptions, and still had 19 fantasy points? But these offensive line issues that they continue to have here for the Chargers as well are making things tough on him. He just doesn't have much time in the pocket to really do anything, and it's leading to a lot of inaccuracy deep down the field. He doesn't have time for those routes to develop, and basically, he's just flinging it. I know Keenan's down there somewhere. I'm just gonna throw it. Now, luckily, Keenan kind of bailed him out last week with a great catch there at the end of the ball game, but they're going against Miami, and Miami allows the 5th most points to opposing quarterbacks at 20.8 per game. The 3 offensive linemen that are questionable here this week, we got Trey Pipkins, Corey Linsley, and Zion Johnson. Plus, we still don't really know for sure about wide receiver Mike Williams as well, and when could he return. This is a high-powered offense that's going to throw the ball a ton. You know you don't sit Justin Herbert, and that'll take us to Monday Night Football. We got a matchup here of the New England Patriots, Arizona Cardinals, started off with Mac Jones, and the guy has 7 passing touchdowns on the season. He's played in 9 games so far, and that's not exactly what you're looking for when it comes to fantasy football. Heck, he's only scored over 10 fantasy points 1 time in his last 5 games played. Now, they have started to throw more here as of late over their last 2 games, but that's because they've fallen behind and didn't really have much of a choice. Now they're going up against Arizona, which is a great matchup because they allow the 4th most points in the league to opposing quarterbacks at 21 per game. Another team, like a broken record, dealing with offensive line issues with Isaiah Wynn, Yadni Kajust. They're both hurt. Plus, we don't know for sure yet about Jacoby Myers, who is arguably the best receiving option for Mac Jones, who's still questionable as well. But as I say all this, as I'm sitting here as a Cardinals fan, everything on paper makes me not that worried about Mac Jones this week. But it's 2022, and anything can happen, and I'm just waiting for 2022 to give me the finger in this matchup and have Mac Jones go off for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. Damn it, he better not, because on paper, that's not what it looks like. He hasn't produced huge numbers consistently enough to start in fantasy football, so he is still a sit. Which means then we will end it with Kyler Murray coming off the bye week. And honestly, the biggest thing here is the trio of players in Arizona. Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, and Hollywood Brown. That trio right there equals fantasy points. Does it equal NFL wins? No. but all I care about in a fantasy football video is points right now. Now, another team that relies heavily on the passing game. He's had at least 2 touchdowns now in 3 straight games, has Kyler Murray. Going up against the Patriots, they're a middle-of-the-pack defense against the pass, allowing 16.5 points per contest, and are a lot easier to throw on than they are to run on. Another team dealing with offensive line injuries. Rondale Moore still hurt. Greg Dortch hurt. But honestly, he's got D-Hop, he's got Hollywood, and he's got a matchup in which he can exploit it through the air. That alone right there, plus the rushing upside, 100% we're going to start Kyler Murray here once again. All right, there you have it, my starts and sits for the quarterback position here, Week 14 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you a little bit of information. If I was, make sure you hit that like button down below and consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Our rankings will be out tomorrow. Maybe you're looking at a couple guys, you don't know which one will be higher than another. Don't worry, we got you covered before kickoff tomorrow night, so you should be good to go. But like I said, I'm going to get out of here for the day. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.